Um, Walter is my teaching assistant, and we've known each other for close to 25 years. And Walter has a wonderful painting. I've been trying to scan the room. He has a painting of Central Park here somewhere. And I haven't had a chance. Back here? It looked great on the website. I'm sure it's a fabulous painting. So next year, the reason I asked Walter to pose for me is because there's a great tradition here at the Salmagundi Club of artists painting artists. And when the outgoing president has their portrait painted, they have another member of the club, right? Paint their portrait, and my friend John Trainer painted Claudia. And before that, Frank Mason painted Richard Young. And it's an old tradition. If you go over to the Frick, there's a painting of Van Dyck painted Ron Schneider's, who was Rubens' animal painter. And it's a great old tradition, so I love having Walter pose and paint another artist. And then next year we're going to switch, and Walter's going to paint my portrait.
Very cool.
All right, now, let me just talk for a minute or two about my philosophy of painting, my approach, because it's a little bit different than what most people are doing. The way most people are taught to paint is they start with a white canvas, they start with a white picture plane, and then they use linear perspective to draw the portrait onto that picture plane, and then because it's a white canvas, they have to move from dark to light to make a painting, and then finally they use aerial perspective to create the space of the painting. And what I like to do is just the reverse of that. I like to start out with the space, because that's essentially what we're painting. There's nothing flat in our subject matter. So I immediately want to get rid of the picture plane, because it starts me out on a flat surface, and since I'm not doing a flat painting and I don't have a flat subject, there's no reason to have a flat surface to paint on. So I imagine the canvas as an empty space, the same as the space Walter is occupying. So I come at it exactly the opposite of what most people are doing. So I start in space, and now instead of building on a flat surface, which is the normal approach, is you build your portrait plane by plane and block by block, constructing and building. As more chairs come in, the audience is getting bigger and bigger. This is how audiences are created, in the moment. So instead of building my painting on a flat surface, the way I like to think of it is more like I'm sculpting in an empty space. So instead of building plane by plane, I'm letting my figure emerge out of that space very slowly, and I'm thinking more like a sculptor than I am like a graphic artist, which is what you do on a flat plane. So it's just a little bit different approach. So then how do you do that? It's a nice idea. How do you do that? See, we did this on Thursday. We're going to get the same print again here on Thursday. But it's a beautiful idea, because I do this in the classroom, and I love this idea of creating a painting in an empty space, because it sort of echoes the creation story from Genesis. You start out with nothing. This is the way Genesis starts out. There's a void. And then into that void comes lightness and dark. And then gradually the objects are entered into it. That's essentially what happens here. We start out with this empty space, and then we turn the light on, and then gradually we have Walter enter the space and occupy that space. And that's always been important to me. When I was very young, the painting that really made me want to become an artist was the Prometheus in Philadelphia. And I didn't realize until years later, many, many, many years later, that the thing that I found so incredibly profound about that painting was not the story of Prometheus and not the way Rubens had painted the figure and Schneider's had painted the eagle, but the way they occupied the space they were in was just absolutely stunning. And because they were occupying that space, it became alive and exciting. They animated the whole space they were in. So when you start on a picture plane, and poor Clement Greenberg spent the entire 20th century talking about the integrity of the picture plane, would drop dead if he weren't already dead. But I'm ignoring Clement Greenberg's great theory of the integrity of the picture plane and going into space. Now, obviously, this is not an empty space. It's a flat canvas. But since all painting is illusion, I can use my imagination. This is not going to be a flat painting when I'm done. No matter how you think about it at the beginning, unless you decide you're doing a flat painting, it's not going to be flat. You know, the Vermeers, the Rembrandts, the Rubens are still flat canvases, but they have this illusion of space. And since I'm painting illusion, why can't I use my imagination to go right into that space at the beginning? Now, how do you do that? How do you do that? And that's the trick that's kept me fascinated for 40 years. Since I'm not constructing a painting, I don't have to put down a fairly finished drawing of Walter and then fill it in. An idea never appeals to me. It sounds a bit like a coloring book. So I can just vaguely get Walter placed on the canvas in the space and then let him emerge. And I like that idea of something emerging from the emptiness rather than building on the surface. It's a very different way of thinking. And I like it because it echoes Genesis. You know, how was man created? You know, God took dirt from the earth and breathed life into it, and man was created whole. You know, he wasn't constructed plane by plane and block by block and then measure this and measure that. He was just emerged. And same with Venus. In mythology, Venus just emerges whole out of the foam of the ocean. And to me, that's an exciting thought. I love that idea of something just emerging out of nothing, and then there it is, and it's just full of life, rather than waiting and building and slowly constructing something until it gets to the end, and hopefully it's alive at the end. But if it's alive right from the beginning, I want this to be a lively painting from whatever the first stroke is, should I ever get to it. And there's a wonderful quote. There was a TV series about 10 years ago, a Canadian TV series about a Shakespearean festival. It's called Slings and Arrows. And early on, one of the actors is asked to speak at a memorial service of a director who had passed away. And when he was acting under this director, he would make notes in the margin of his copy of the play. And he decided for his talk at the memorial, he would read from these notes. And one of them struck me so profoundly because it's exactly the way I think. And it was this. He said, the theater is an empty box, and it's the job of the actors to fill that box with fury and ecstasy and revolution. And I just thought, my God, that's such a profound thought. That sounds so much more exciting to me than I want to sit down at my easel and copy what's in front of me as exactly as possible. But to fill a theater, or to fill a canvas, or to fill a piece of paper with fury and ecstasy and revolution is something to get you out of bed in the morning. You know, it's something when you sit in front of your easel, now I have something that I can get excited about. So I want to paint something that's alive. So here we have the great Walter Mosley. And I want to paint Walter as something exciting and something revolutionary. So let's just take, now I have a middle tone. See, I said everybody else starts on a white canvas. I like a middle tone because it lets me move both into lights and darks easily. If I just have a white canvas, no matter what I put on it, it will be dark. And then I have to fill up all that white canvas in order to start painting the light. So this way, I can now jump into lights and darks anytime I want. And it's a little bit like sitting in the middle of the piano. When you're playing the piano, you can reach the dark notes and the light notes very easily. But if you're on a white canvas, you're essentially sitting at this end of the piano and trying to play like this, because you can't get any higher. So I like the idea of sitting in the middle and being able to go high and low. And it seems to me like a more logical approach, an easier way to approach painting. So now that I have the middle, I'm going to put Walter in with just a few darks, just a little something to get, and I don't have to make a finished drawing at this point, just anything. And I like doing this so I can show you what I'm doing. I can play to the camera. This is kind of fun. I'm not much of an actor, so this is my chance to do this. But here's Walter, and we sit back. Better. See, I like that. So Walter can just, all I want to do at this point is find Walter in space. I just want to know where he's going to be emerging from. And this is as inexact as you could possibly get. Really, this takes me about an hour. So I'm going to rush it a little bit so that we get a little bit farther. But normally I would just do this. I would just float around here rather gently for about an hour until I decided that Walter was occupying the space I wanted him to occupy. And then we can move on from there. And you're going to come up there. And that's good.
What painting vehicle are you using?
What?
What painting medium are you using?
This is, there's a combination of things. What I have in the jar is just 1 part linseed oil, 1 part turpentine, and 1 part Damar varnish, which is the basis of all mediums. And then, because I'm painting so quickly and because I like having something that will hold a little more weight, I also made some Maragé medium at home.
And what's in that?
And it's basically the same ingredients plus lead, and it's cooked. And you can ask me, I can give you the recipe, or you can look it up online. It was developed by the great restorer, Jacques Maragé, who was really quite brilliant as a restorer and as a chemist. And he was the perfect candidate to recreate Rubens' lost medium. Everybody was always trying to figure out how the hell Rubens did what he did, because nobody could do it for hundreds of years after him. So everybody was trying to figure out what Rubens was using. They figured, well, it must have been medium. You know, they ignored talent, and they said, well, it must have been the medium. And so they've tried recreating his mediums. And Maragé was the perfect candidate to do that, because he had the chemical knowledge, and as a restorer, he was intimate with paintings of all different periods, and he came up with this gel medium. And the beauty of it is, because it contains lead, you're cooking lead into the medium. Lead is the great dryer, And since you're cooking it in, you have this medium that you can use with great opacity or great transparency and will also dry quickly. And it's great stuff. My dear Frank Mason introduced me to this and taught me how to cook it. And people are worried about how dangerous it is because it has lead and this and that. And some people have argued that it dries and then it softens up again, and it's problematic. But if you cook it properly, it's just an incredibly beautiful thing. But you have to have ventilation. You can't do it in your New York City apartment because you'll die. And then it will do you no good. Even Rubens couldn't paint after he was dead.
Have you ever tried to use the stuff you can buy online, the Narroget?
No, because I make my own. I do everything myself. I like to make my own. I prepared my own canvas with white lead. And when I have time, I like to grind my own paints. I like to have as much control over the materials as possible all the time. Because the more control you have over the materials, the more control you have over what you want to express. And that's all anybody cares about, is what you want to say.
Did you design your box with
This? That's a long story. I'll tell you that later.
Okay.
This comes out of the Mason Dumont tradition of landscape painting.
Okay.
But it's great fun. This box, I've been painting, I came to the League in 1974. That's when I bought this paint box. And I've glued it together and stapled it together and duct taped it together, and it's been my lifelong friend, and I'm never going to get rid of it no matter what happens. Unless it's in a fire and is completely destroyed, that's the paint box for the rest of my life. So here's Walter floating in space. The poor guy has been floating in space all the time on the afternoon. So now that when I'm comfortable with where he is in the space that I'm painting, then I can do what God did on the second or third day, is create light. Bring light into the painting and separate the lightness and the dark, and then when you do that, since this is already a middle tone, and if you have a light, a middle, and a dark, you can start to create form. If you just have two of those, you have flat things against each other. But when you go light, middle, and dark, you can start to create form. And I want Walter to emerge out of the space as a great form, as this is the great miracle of life emerging out of nothing. He's being born again. What a great thought. So let's take anything that's lighter than that. Anything that's lighter than this and lighter than my middle tone is going to look like light in the painting, no matter what it is. And I like to start out, not overly light. I'm just going to take some. Let's start the way the old masters would start. They didn't have cadmiums. They didn't have cadmiums until early in the 19th century. Turner and Constable were the first to have the advantage of cadmiums. But let's just take some earth color, some ochre and some terra rosa. Just as simple as you can get. And some white. And I'm going to make a middle tone. And I'm doing it very deliberately. See, I'm still thinking of that piano concept. So I'm going to go from light to dark as I'm painting. So I'm playing on a piano. So this is I'm doing a little portrait sonata, and Walter's the accompanist, and I'm the lead musician, and we'll play a piece of music together. So here's something. This is going to obviously look light against what we just put down. And I always love, I could give you an hour-long lecture about edges, which I have many, many thoughts about, but I'll forego that and say that when I'm painting, a lot of people will start from the edges and work their way into the center of the form so that they know where it stops and where it starts. I like to start in the middle and go out and build from the center. the same way a sculptor would sculpt with clay. A sculptor doesn't start a clay sculpture by making an outside edge and then filling the clay in the center. He builds a mass and then sculpts around that. I like that idea of going up and around the form all the time, constantly reaching. Students know this gesture very well. I do this all the time in the classroom. We're going around the form all the time, behind and in front. So I'm going to start right out of the middle, and I love, the light is so important, it's so beautiful. And Walter's got such an incredibly prominent forehead. Excuse me. All right. Oh, that's pretty steady. It's steady enough. So here's Walter, starting to emerge right out of the center of the form. And I haven't put in eyes and nose, but the hard part about doing a demonstration is you can't see what I'm thinking. You can only see what happens on the canvas. And if you could see my thought process, it would be so much more informative. You would see me thinking out and around the form. And even though I haven't placed his eyes and I haven't placed his nose, as I'm doing this, those things are in my head, and I am drawing Walter in space without doing a linear drawing on the canvas. He's being drawn as I'm pushing the paint around. So at this point, I can just find the shape of Walter's head. Already, to me, this is already exciting. This could be a finished painting. And it would be, Walter emerging from the emptiness, from the void. And then my brush, I'm loading it up all the way into the ferrule. So when I want more, I can get more paint. When I want less, I can be more gentle. And Walter can start to emerge. And I don't like to rush paintings, even if it's only an hour. We'll just let as much of Walter emerge as will emerge in an hour. If I wanted to, there is a way you could just, go slap, 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 and bang, 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 and you could have a painting in 45 minutes and everybody would be very impressed. But it doesn't really tell you anything about the way I think about painting. And I think that's terribly important, how an artist thinks. I'm always trying to figure out how an artist thinks about how they create things, how creation happens. That's why, you go to Genesis, or you go to mythology, or you go someplace else. There's lots of creation theories. You could pick any number of creation theories. I like to know how creation happens. So when I'm studying an artist, I like to go to their drawings, because that's where you can see their mind working. When you get a finished painting, you can get lost in the masses and the glazes and the finishes and all kinds of things. But in a drawing, you're seeing that fresh first thought. And that's where, my favorite artists are always great draftsmen. And those who, occasionally there's a Franz Hals and some people who, there's no Vermeer drawings that anybody knows of, and I don't think there's any Franz Hals drawings. But that's all right, they get a pass, because I know they can draw. There's no doubt that they can draw. But when I'm looking at Sargent, I want to look at Sargent's drawings, and I want to look at Van Dyck's drawings, and Rubens' drawings, and Rembrandt's drawings and etchings, and they're really incredible things. See, and I don't care that it's a yellow shirt at this point. I'm just bringing light into the painting. Now, once we have that, we can separate light and dark and bring some shadows. Start finding. Another way I like to think about painting is, this is one of the advantages of living in the country. You can get up in the morning and you can watch things emerge out of the mist. You know, sometimes you go out and you set up in the morning and it'll be so misty that unless you've been in that spot before, you have no idea what you're even painting. And I like to watch as the mist starts to dissipate and things start to emerge very slowly out of the mist. And that's such a beautiful moment. I love that. And sometimes you'll see a little bit of light catching a group of trees, and then you'll start to see a little shadow on the backside. And that's what I'm trying to do here, just have it emerge, a little light, a little dark, and then the form starts to develop. So this whole idea of emergence is such a beautiful thing. So let's try and find a little more of Walter here, as he sits so patiently. I just want to get a sense of character, as well as space and light and shade and all that important stuff. But character too. And Walter's quite a character. So, warms and cools. Yeah, so far what I have is warm, warm, warm. And the general rule, as everybody knows, is if it's warm in the light, it's cool in the shadow, and vice versa. Again, I'm going to be a little more radical. And I don't necessarily stick to that, because I can put warms and cools in both the lights and the shadows, and I can get a balance that way. I don't have to separate the warms from the cools. I can let them play together. And I like that idea, that everything in the painting plays together, and the warms aren't here and the cools are there, and they can't touch each other. So I'm just going to play with what I feel like using at this point. I could use a cool for the shadows. I could use whatever I want. I just happen to feel we're in this nice warm light, and I want to go with my warms, and I just want to find Walter sitting in space here. Now, for me, this looks like something that's alive already. This doesn't look like I'm doing a picture of Walter. You know, I like the idea of taking mud and breathing life into it, because that's what we're doing. We're taking mud, and the artist's job is to breathe life into that and create something. We're doing creation. I love the idea of creation. And if you think about it, it's a perfectly natural thing for man to do, to create. Because if you go back, I don't want to sound like a religious course here, but if you go back to Genesis, man was created in the image and likeness of God, the Creator. So if we're created in the image and likeness of the Creator, we are by design, by nature, creative beings. And so this is the most natural, normal thing we can do. The oldest thing we find from the history of man are the cave paintings. That was one of the first things man wanted to do, was create on the walls of the caves. So it's this very natural, long, old, noble tradition to be creative. So, now stop painting and create. And essentially what I'm doing here is what a sculptor would do with clay. I'm just getting masses of clay onto my armature and starting to find the shape of my head that I'm doing. I'm trying to get a sense of the shape of this head. And we have yet, this is not very light yet. We haven't brought much light into the painting. We're still in middle tone, and it will evolve into what I want it to be. And as I'm doing this early work, I can study Walter and decide what it is I want him to be. I don't have to. Light, middle, dark.
Yeah, I just don't know if you had any grays in it.
Not yet. This is just, so far it's just the light and the dark playing against the middle on the palette. It's very amusing. Elizabeth and I have been married 29 years. And we've realized as we were setting up, Elizabeth is doing a demo tomorrow. I'm just her opening act, you realize. She's doing that tomorrow. But as we were getting ready to do this, she said, "I've never watched you paint. I've never watched her paint. You know, we painted side by side. We've been in the same studio, but we're working on our paintings." And she said, "This is going to be fascinating. I've never watched you paint before." So tomorrow I get to watch her paint. Isn't that an amazing thing? There you are. You know, I've seen unfinished paintings. I've seen things in progress, but I've never just sat and watched her paint. And she never comes in the classroom, so she never watches me paint. And we're painting from scratch, not even doing a crit in the classroom, but painting from scratch is a great thing. So there's Walter just starting to emerge. And at this point, I want to keep the idea of space going. So even though I haven't drawn it yet, even though I've only used 2 tones, I want to start putting this head into space. And to do that, I'm going to use, it's a black background, but it has light on it, so it's not the darkest part of the painting. I can still go darker under Walter's hair or various places. So I'm going to go, let's just make it a simple black. Let's make it a simple gray at this point. We don't have to be, and I'm deliberately putting it here because that's where I want it to be on the piano. You know, I want it to be in the left hand, but not the last key on the piano. This is my bass line. So Ann's a great pianist. Well, it's going to be down at the red medium, red deep value.
That's the middle value.
As a middle value in the background. And I can compare it against my, if we do this, I just put some black on the palette. I now have the entire piano from the highest to the lowest note. I have 88 chances in here to paint what I want to paint. But if I do this, it's clearly not yet black. And yet, when I put it on the canvas, this is going to be a dark. And it's going to set off, look what it's going to do to the light tones. And it's all relationships. I said this to somebody in the classroom once. I said, painting is all relationships. I said, if you have good relationships in your life, you'll be a good painter. I might as well just give up now. So I don't want anybody to give up. I'm not painting the fabric. I'm painting the space behind Walter's head. And that's conceptual. All of this is very conceptual. do this a little faster. So I can be very free out here because I'm not landing on anything. I'm just painting the space behind his head. We'll start getting into too much detail. Let's just see if we can start turning this head in space. And that's done with grays. As you turn out of the light, things start to gray and disappear. And I can use, let's use something in the middle of the palette. This is right in the middle. And I've always loved the way Franz Hals would do it. And he would just throw some ochre into his grays. And he made these wonderful sort of green grays. And I always liked that idea, so I'm going to use it. And you know, this is because I'm always thinking about creativity. The way I paint changes every 20 minutes. So this happens to be the way I'm painting this painting today at this moment, and 20 minutes from now I might be in a whole different direction. And they're all fine. If you want to start on a white picture plane and build a painting, that's fine. You can do a beautiful painting that way. There's no right and wrong way to do a painting. And for all the artists here, I'm going to play God for a moment and let you know that there is no such thing as right and wrong in a painting. You'll never get it right and you'll never get it wrong, because there is no such thing. And the way I explain it to the students in the league is I asked them to imagine if we had Titian and Picasso and Manet and Sargent, and instead of 35 students, we had 35 great geniuses in the room, all painting the same model. Which one of them got it right? Which one gets it wrong? And it depends on who it is. So there's no right and wrong. So you don't have to worry about getting it wrong. To me, that's very liberating. I don't have to worry about getting it wrong. I'll get it right for me and what I want to express. That's all I can do, is get what I want to express. This is actually turning into more of a lecture than a painting demonstration. But I hope you're getting something out of it. So, but it's the way I think. It's the way I like to think about painting. And it's the way I talk to myself when I'm painting. I'm talking about creativity. That's what's going on in my mind. And I know I can paint a head. So we can start to turn Walter's head with some grays. And I don't mind turning the top of the head. Since I'm working in clay, I'm just going around all the forms. When you're sculpting in clay, you're not worried about what color the hair is. You're not worried about, all kinds of things. So since I'm sculpting in space, I don't have to worry about all these things. And I'll get to color. Color is one of the most wonderful things in painting, and I'll get to it. I can turn the shoulder and start to turn the side of the finger. Now, is this making any sense? Should I go on?
Yes, you do.
Okay, all right. There's no way out, is there? Now if you were inside my head, you would hear me thinking about the bone structure. Yeah, you're seeing a stroke go on the canvas, but you don't know that what I'm doing is structuring the head. And so far we've done, it's a very light palette so far. I've always been very jealous of Walter's hair. So it's a great chance to paint. All right, let's go in and go after that beautiful light on the head. And I'm just going to go up. I'm just going to move up without getting overly complicated with all kinds of thoughts about color, and I just want to get something that starts to build the light toward the top of the head. And this is, I'm just looking for something that's lighter than what I've already put on. And in the great tradition of Rubens, and this only happened for a very short time. Rubens' technique of painting was to build up opacities in the lights and then let things pass off and go almost and sometimes into complete transparencies in the shadow. And we can get into a long discussion about that. There's lots of reasons for it. I happen to think it's a profoundly beautiful thought, and it died out within 100 years of his death. That died out, and by the time you get to the beginning of the 19th century, everything is opacity everywhere. It's all even. And you can do beautiful paintings that way, too. Sargent, I was reading a biography of Sargent, and at one point somebody was writing a letter, and somebody asked him about opacity and transparency. And he said, he waves it off, he said, "It's a trick." And he just blew it off. I said, well, isn't that what painting is? This is all a trick. This is all optical illusion. So why is one trick trickier than another trick? The idea is this is all optical illusion. We're trying to make form and space and light out of mud, out of dirt. So I like the idea of opacity. So when I'm putting the light on, I'm going with opacity. And I can model that without picking up a lot of extra paint and adding brush strokes. I can use brush work to model that light. And I like doing that. So you start finding, now I'm doing the same thing that everybody else is doing with where they're building planes. I'm now finding planes and I'm doing all the things everybody else is doing. I just approach it from a different direction. And the light on Walter's head is just absolutely stunning. I can come back and put that on 20 times because it's the most fun thing in the world. And I like having fun. Yeah, I'm still in ochres and terra rosas. I haven't moved out of that yet. And gradually I can move into the cadmiums and bring a little more life into it. But I like this idea to start out. I like starting out with something in the middle. And finding the frontal bone. And following that frontal bone right out over the front plane and around on the side. I love that idea. I love coming right out into that gray that we already have, modeling into it, and it's really sculpture on canvas. Walter's trying his best to watch. But he's seen me do this over and over and over again. In the bottom of the head, I don't want to be as big and profound as the light on the top. great masseter muscle. So I'm finding things as I go along. Anytime I'm finding something moving into the light, I'm using more paint and more pressure on the brush to create more opacity. And then as I go out of that, I ease up on the brush and move away. Now let's go down a little bit into a very gentle color. Let's just go down into Terra Rosa. And we still have that idea of light to dark all the time. But I like the earth colors. They're gentle. You know, they're not so intense. I've been thinking a lot about chromatic intensity recently. And as you watch people like Henry in the Ashcan school trying to push the color and the chromatic intensity, I'm noticing that when they do that, the painting starts to get a little flatter. And thought for a long time about why that happens. And it's because in order to get the space and the distance, you need to gray the tonalities. If you put a mountain in with you see a mountain and it looks blue, if you do it with a very chromatically intense blue, it doesn't go back as far as if you gray it a bit. So I'm thinking about these things and playing with chromatic intensity. So I'm going to keep this as, this is still at this point a very low chromatic intensity. And flesh tones do not have a lot of chromatic intensity anyway. So it's a very safe place to be. But I can start bringing some little bit of color into Walter's face. And because I know where I am in pitch, I can't miss. You can't be wrong, you can't miss. Isn't that a great thought? You can't be wrong. I just find that so liberating. Then I'm not worried about staying within the lines of the drawing. So I can let my masses move very freely. It works well. All right, let's take, I always start out with big brushes and move to small brushes, big ideas and move to details. It's always big to small. But let's see if we can start getting a little bit more drawing in here. We can get under that bone. And I'm just finding some shadows on my head somewhere at some point. Now let's go back to these beautiful Franz Hals green grays, which I love so much, and start building some of the middle planes, the middle tones. maybe ease up on it a bit. I don't know any sculptors who sculpt the nose and then stick it onto their sculpture. They model it, they build it up, and they move it around. And I like to think of this way. It's quite a lovely, sensual way to think about painting. Of course, everybody will find their own way. I'm just finding some lights and darks in construction and middle tones, and just gradually building. Just sit here and play with these forms and develop and move up into the eye socket and move up onto the frontal bone and find all these great things happening. And decide exactly what expression I want to give to Walter's eyes. Walter can have many, many different moods and moments. I was painting Elizabeth's grandfather once, and when I finished the painting, I felt like I could have done 6 more paintings of the same man, because there were you can't get them all into one painting. There's so many personalities, so many moods, and so many moments. If you get the twinkle, you miss the seriousness. You know, it's hard to get them all. So I can decide in this moment which, particularly with Walter, I want to capture. Tops.
You should have at least 15 minutes. Yeah. You gave
Bonus round.
You gave up? You gave up 10 or 12?
I can give up.
Wow. We can.
I can give up.
Yes. Tom,
Yeah.
show us the palette.
Sure.
Okay.
much for the caressing.
Get tough, Tom.
Now we're... The caressing part is okay for getting started. Now you're into the excitement. We've got from God and creation all the way to sex and climaxing all in 1 hour. Now we're ready to go here. We're ready for it to all happen. We're ready for the big finish. But you can.
It is what he said.
But that's why I said it doesn't matter. There's no right and wrong. You can gently caress your painting, or you can jump in and you can just do something that is just completely flying around. You can, I mean, Sargent batted stuff out all the time. You know, he stuff. The beautiful painting I saw in Florence, some cows and a landscape that Sargent had done, and later I read about it. He did it during a stop between 2 trains. What? Yeah, a big painting. It was this big. A couple of cows, landscapes, and it was just, you know, one train had stopped, he was going from one place to another, the train had stopped, and he was waiting for the next train, he'd pull out a canvas, batted out this thing. And it was incredible. So there's no one way to do anything. So if I decide if you're doing sunrise, you've got to do this. You know, if you have Walter sitting for you, and you don't mind if he ages while you finish the painting, then you can paint more slowly. But at sunrise, you've got to be up and you've got to get out there, and it changes every 10 seconds. This is great. I ran out of black, so I just scooped up some umber and ultramarine to the background. And it's at the same value, so it doesn't really matter. I can throw some cerulean in there if I so choose. But I want to find some of the space back. Cadmiums. Little spot of cadmium right into that. A little bit of excitement. was slowly merging, now it's being shoved out. This is the miracle of birth, you know? You're out in the world, good luck.
Last 3 weeks. It's so great. My third cold. Ellen.